All right, folks, here we are. This is what they call the penultimo of the old house talks. We'll have one more before the season's over. And my dear friend Michelle Whalen, Pomada, is going to speak about the other part of Point Roberts, Boundary Bay, where she grew up. And not everybody was Icelandic, so this is
the Irish contingent.
Yeah, Irish contingent.
And the waters were Irish, I guess, too.
Yeah. Okay, so there you go.
Well, thanks for coming out, and sorry that this is so small, but maybe I can either pass it closer, whichever is most helpful. Anyway, my talk with you will be about the Whalen settlement, which includes the farmhouse and then the cottage that we happen to have. Carol Fowler has what was the old store that my grandparents had on Bayview, and she'll be talking with you about that. Yes. So my great-grandfather, Patrick James Whalen, emigrated from Wicklow, Ireland at the time of the potato famine, and he was 9 at the time that he went with his parents to Quebec, and he was raised there, married, and moved his young family down to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where my grandfather was born, as well as one of my great aunts. They then, on their way to San Francisco, because of the boom, they were taking the train across country and heard about homesteading in the Dalles, Oregon. So we got the family off the train, and they homesteaded there. My great-grandmother passed away there in 1889, and Patrick and the kids moved up first to Bellingham, and then we heard about homesteading here on Point Roberts, and they settled at Maple Beach in 1891. Patrick homesteaded 12 acres to farm and later purchased the Maple Beach area and the Palisades up the hill. During this time, he married Emma Samuelson, and Bunny helped me with that information. I thought she was a Samuelson. I saw her name on a census as Emma, but I know very little about her, so I'm hoping to learn more through this process too. Then, let's see, so these are some pictures of the farm at the early stages. That's what the farmhouse looked like. There was an old carriage house next to it and an earlier barn. And I was told at one point that they lived in a house, which may be that one, before they even built this farm. Let me go down. This is a picture, okay. The Maple Beach area was really rich in Native American artifacts, and one of the stories that I like hearing or was told when I was quite young was about my grandfather. Soon after they homesteaded, was exploring the area and found a canoe up in the tree. And so he went up to get it and found a skeleton inside. And so he scrambled back down. Larry and I were just at the Ladner Museum, the Delta Museum in Ladner, and speaking with Daryl McKenzie, who's the curator there. And he said that that was the common way that the Indians who early inhabited the area before the smallpox epidemic would bury their dead or honor their dead was up in the canoes in the tree, and there's notation of that in Captain Vancouver's writings. There's a midden that runs almost the length of Maple Beach back from down by your place, I believe, that runs up by the farmhouse. And when my grandfather was plowing the area, a lot of artifacts came up, two of which are these. And when Larry and I were in Ladner at the museum, I was pleasantly surprised to find there's a whole collection of Whalen site artifacts. So these will probably end up there.
Can you turn it like this, go back and forth?
So here are some of the artifacts that we saw there. That one is some more of these. Some they used as weights, others for as a mortar and pestle. And these are awls that they used for spears. And we used to have a bone that my dad said was used as a needle.
How far back did they say that those dated, some of that dated?
Back to 3,000 years ago was the early inhabitants, evidence of it. Then these are pictures of, you can come and look later, I'm sorry, I was hoping, anyway. There's a gathering of my grandparents and my dad, who was about 2 or 3 at the time, and my aunt. And then this is a picture of tenters and a cottage in probably about 1913 or 1915 in Boundary Bay. And that's Goodman Road that goes down and becomes Elm Street. I love that old vehicle there, and the farmhouse. That it had a porch, which was later removed. My grandfather Michael, at the age of 12, helped to maintain the farm while his father drove a construction team of horses working in downtown Vancouver. Later, as a young man working in a cannery up in Juneau, Alaska, Grandpa met my grandmother, Lila, who had come out for a visit from Chicago. They married in Seattle and then came back to the farm. Grandpa had a dairy farm, and so that's a picture of him with his dairy cows. And they raised chickens as well, and I remember hearing that they helped supply the point during the Depression with eggs and butter and milk and that kind of thing, like the other farmers did as well. There was a milk house, and still is. There's a milk house that was built alongside the farmhouse and into the hill for, no doubt, hoping it would be cooler. And in the early 19-teens, Michael subdivided Maple Beach area, and he sold to vacationers who first tented, and then I love these old pictures. I had, or have, a collage of these that were put together actually by the 2 realtors who were selling the properties, Curtis and Dorgan. And so these are pictures, and Mr. Dorgan is in several of them. And then here's a picture of Maple Beach before the bulkhead was put in. And these are early cabins, and I love this one. Hopefully you'll be able to come up and take a better look at it later. With trees right on the water's edge, and this dirt path that went along what is now Bayview, and these old cottages and tenting. Here's one of Curtis and Dorgan, and they're tenting, and they also, this is the cabin that they built together, and that is the one that we have now, which I'll be talking about later after Carol's presentation. And that was built in the first records that we were able to find were in 1915.
That's the one on Fur Street?
Yes, Fur and Bayview. In the 1940s, my aunt and my grandmother remodeled the farmhouse after the style of the New England style. And this is a picture of what it looked like after a big snow. And what my dad came home to after World War II. This shows the old carriage house and woodshed, and this is the back of it. There was a porch there that went to the carriage house, and then this shows the milk house pretty well here.
Is that still in existence?
Yes, it's been converted. In the 40s, Grandpa built a nice big dairy barn, and this is a picture of the Ladner Riding Club that used to come down on their horses and gather at the farm, and then they'd go riding on the sandbars. And
Something got it wrong. It went back to the beginning.
pardon me? Oh.
Sometimes they have a mind of their own. Yes, they do.
They do.
Mysterious.
These are pictures of inside before it was sold. This was a party that Rosemary had, I think at Christmas time, because it looks like there's a small tree on the mantle. Grandpa was probably in his 90s there, and Gavin Bilton, I don't know if any of you remember him, and did you? And Jeff Martin was there, and Logie Thorstensen. They're in these pictures. Then in the 80s, it was sold. There was an owner in between, but the Laportes bought it and turned it into Maple Meadows Bed and Breakfast. Did some charming things to it. They turned the milk house into a suite and made the pump house, which reminds me, I skipped a part. When they sold the lots to the vacationers who built cottages, people at first came up to get water from the springs that were on the hillside, and then Grandpa built reservoirs and fed water to the developed area through pipes. Like this is a piece of the old pipe that must be from the 19 teens or 20s. So the pump house, there were two reservoirs, one to the south of the farmhouse and one to the north. And twice a day, Grandpa would switch the water source from one to the other, once in the morning and once at night. And so the Laportes turned the pump house into a suite as well. This is, they added a porch, they put a French door in the dining area where there had been a big window, and added this porch. This is now the milk house suite. And this is what it looks like now that Desiree Kleeman and her husband have it. The Laportes put the porch back on. And this is the living room. When I was growing up, the walls were painted navy. And it was after this picture that Rosemary had used to model the remodel after. And the fireplace was white, and it's now an ebony and very nice sage-colored walls like in the early American style. This is the living room at the farmhouse, the same knotty pine, tongue and groove paneling of the stairway going up. Grandma used to keep her canned goods, jars of canned goods in the area underneath the stairway, and Desiree does the very same. It was kind of fun to see that. This is the dining room, Desiree at the table there. And the ceiling of the dining room is this tongue and groove knotty pine that's done almost like a herringbone pattern. I'm sure that's not the right word for it, but I think it's pretty cool.
Log cabin.
Pardon me?
Like a log
cabin.
Yeah, beautiful.
And the Kleemans took out the wall between the dining room and the kitchen, which really opened it up. And the cupboards are the same other than the fact that they're painted. And the brick of the old fireplace is exposed there, which adds a lot of charm. That's a picture through of the outside, the meadow, and it's so fun to see that there are still horses there. Just like when I was growing up, I'd look out the dining room window and see the horses under the big maple tree. That's more of the meadow outside the kitchen window. And this is the pump house suite for the bed and breakfast now. So the Kleemans rent out the milk house and the pump house, but they don't have guests staying in the main house. Now, Carol, I'll pass it off to you.
All right. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Hello. And this proud owner of the old Whalen store. And I'm sort of old school, so I've got cut and paste stuff.
More visible.
Well, yeah,
That's good.
I'm not good at that. So we bought the property in 2001, and part of that, there was an artist, Evelyn Roth, who was quite a wild person, and she did many things to the house that weren't great, including just everything was painted every different color. It was in pretty rough shape during the time she had it. And so what I've got here, to give you a little bit of an idea, there's a pretty original picture
When was it built?
of the home. 1921, I think, it was completed. So built in 1920. And we understand that the Whalens obviously built it, but whether the construction crew were the same people that were building the canneries. So it is built like a cannery. It has these huge beams that are like wired so they could get the tension right or something like that. So I mean, it was built to last. And unlike most cottages, it's huge. It's just under 5,000 square feet, and so it was built with the upstairs, 3 bedrooms. And I don't know if there ever was a bathroom originally upstairs. Oh, there was. So there was.
During my lifetime, yes.
There was a bath.
Yes.
It wasn't, because I know there were outhouses as well behind the store. But so it was three bedrooms, really large closets. So the front bedroom had 2 5-by-8 closets. Each of the other bedrooms had these closets, and then it had what originally were open porches, and which in the picture probably got closed in by here, probably within 15 years, I'm thinking, of when it was built. So the porches all got, windowed. When we bought the property, upstairs, what were closets are now bathrooms, and what was the bathroom is a kitchen. So there's 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a big living space, kitchen, deck, but very much it's original upstairs. The old floors that Evelyn had painted notes on, the wooden floors, we had all sanded and refinished. The walls, which are lath and plaster, and quite a few of the walls upstairs were also, it was almost like, was thin wood veneer, like sort of I don't know what you would call it, almost like a wood grass cloth. So there was lath and plaster and then this wood, which we then had all the walls replastered over top, just to smooth everything out. But all original doors, everything upstairs. So here, you've got pretty much original. You've got, which I think is probably your grandfather. A lot of the pictures have this guy in a white shirt, he's on a horse, or he's near a car. Or maybe...
I'll take a look later.
Yeah, so I've got pictures here. And then in here, it's pretty much all the front porches and that, it's been all closed in. So when you look at the house here, the whole front's open. That whole side was open, right to the back, with a little bit of a jog. And you entered, downstairs you entered the living room off this porch. So there was a living room in the back, and then what might have been the kitchen, and then the stairwell went up to the bedrooms. And then the bottom of the building was a soda fountain. You see in the picture with the sign, they were selling cigars, cigarettes, pop. There was a tea room at some point. Sorry? Milkshakes. So originally, so it was built for that, and the side of the store, this side over here, again, I don't know if it was originally or just part of the time, was a butcher shop. And so when we purchased, there was lots of these big hooks, big old meat hooks that were laying around, and it's sort of out in the back. So it was quite the enterprise. And as you know, it went through, there's a bit of a history here, but it was always, there was always some business going on there. When we bought it, we actually had to prove to the county that there had been a business there. You know, it's zoned commercial, but we still had to spend a year going through the whole process of saying, yes, there was a store, yes, we're recreating what was there. And the original idea of buying the building was just to have offices, not to have anything else. And the first thing we were told was, on the waterfront in Washington State, you have to have something that is of a benefit to the people. It has to be water-related, a cafe, or boat rentals, or bathing suit rentals. You're not allowed to have like a high-tech office. That was a no-go. So that was when we said, we have this big place, let's open a restaurant, which was
Wonderful.
It was
That was
wonderful.
good, yeah.
I
So,
never got into it. It's always crowded.
well, it was hard to get into, but only for 2 months.
Right.
So we were only open for 2 years, so the entire bottom floor was transformed into a restaurant, and then transformed again into a house. So there's been quite a few changes down there. There's quite a few rooms that were there that aren't anymore, other rooms that have been added. It's to the point where our contractor, when he comes in, he has a hard time remembering what was where. You know, he'd say, no, I'm sure there was a door there. And no, it was over there. And so, so now we live on the main floor, and the upstairs we do holiday rentals. And I think it's a great use of that space. We have people that come from all over, Vancouver, Europe, the States, and they get to enjoy our little piece of loveliness down there. There's a couple upstairs right now that are booked for 5 days, and he came down yesterday and he said, we can't leave. They've never been to Point Roberts, they've never been to Maple Beach, and can we have one more night? And I got to talk to you about coming next year. But what he said, which is exactly what this whole little area is, he said it's like a step back in time. It's a little piece of heaven. It's he's got little kids and they're out biking, and so I think for us we're quite happy to have been able to offer that, which has been good. So I've got this, which you can see, the before, afters, the many renovations up to here, and up to the rave reviews. and then there's pictures here that you can look through. I've got interior. Those are the only two of when it was. Those are maybe from you, because we got copies from.
Probably from Kim, actually,
From
my
Kim,
sister. Yes.
That's right. She
Yes.
gave us a box of pictures
Oh,
that
good.
we copied and then gave back. So the original store soda fountain, and I mean there's some wonderful pictures of these girls. You know, it looks like they're Sunday best. They probably went down to get
In
a
the
treat.
20s or so, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be in the 20s. And the White Star taxi, we've got quite a few pictures of this. So I gather most of the people came from Westminster side. So they would drive, they would come, I don't know how, Petula Bridge, I guess. Or,
They took the ferry.
It's actually met the ferry in Ladner and brought
they took the ferry. Okay, I didn't realize that. Well, so how did all the, these pictures? I brought these if anybody wants that card. I counted in that picture alone, there must be 60 huge cars. So they weren't coming on a ferry. It must have been a way around.
Oh, Patella Bridge, yeah.
It took a long time.
Yeah, Patella Bridge. Yeah, so they would come Patella Bridge. And, yeah.
You see, there was no liquor in Canada on a Sunday, so that's why they came.
Did your family come on the ferry from New Westminster? That's not
We
real.
all-
And I remember taking the ferry from Ladner into, on the other side, where the Dees Island Tunnel now goes.
So, I guess just one more thing on the old house, which is the talk that says, is when you buy an old house, it's a lot of work.
Yes.
Beware. And things like on this property, we had numerous buildings that we had to take down. They were just falling down. And the whole entire front of the building, because of previous renovations, was unstable. They had taken out support posts. So we had to take off the entire front. I don't know if people ever saw when that happened, because it was during the winter. So the whole front was taken off. Huge concrete pads put under, so all the floor had to be lifted. These concrete and earthquake proofing, so it's got these. So what would have been open, we now have these 6-foot bays, and that's all this steel that's bolted in down somewhere. And then we
She's gonna
put,
be the only one left if there's an earthquake.
yeah, that's right.
Maybe
And then we put the front porch back on, but left off just the side pieces that had been enclosed. So, so now when you look at the building, there's, originally it was a lot of porch, now there's 2 open porches. But for most of the time, the entire thing was closed in. And I think, yeah, if anybody wants to look, I've got some nice sort of before and afters upstairs of what we bought and what nice and clean and lovely it looks now.
That's nice.
I can add a little bit about the outbuildings that you mentioned. Those were the public restrooms.
So in the back, so there was, got a picture of it here. There was a sort of a cottage-looking thing, but this part here was part of the original outhouses.
Yes,
So
and a storage area that.
yeah, and then the original garage was there when we bought as well. And then between the garage and this building, Raphael, the artist, had a studio. So it was just literally, it was just building on building on building. And the middle part was really just plywood and, no wiring, whatever, extension cord type thing. So he was there. Oh, so he was there for about 10 years. And so it's got quite the history.
And you've done lovely things with it, Carol. It's so nice to see how you've preserved and improved it. It's beautiful.
And I think brought it back closer to what it looked like.
Yes,
Does anybody still thinking it's still a restaurant?
I had a woman a couple of weeks ago, and I think she was going to visit somebody she'd never been down, and she pulled up front, and we had company, and they said, I think that woman's just going to walk in the door. She just opened the door and she went, so what do you sell here? Yeah.
Out of time. She came out of time.
No. I mean, we still have the big coffee machine, so we could make a little money on the side.
To help pay for
But
those,
yeah,
for
there you
those
go.
pillars.
Thank you,
and
Carol.
that.
Thank you very much.
Just very much souvenir.
I think Michelle has a few more words to say.
My husband reminded me to mention the skating rink, which I think you've all seen, and it's in the photo that Carol is, or is that just parking area in that?
Michelle,
I think the skating rink went in.
right there, that big picture on the wall.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
there.
that's a great picture of it, yes. In the 30s. And that added a lot of fun. Of course, Metcalf's dances afforded a lot of fun for people as well.
Do you know when the skating rink was closed, Michelle?
I think it was the summer of '59.
It became
Yes.
a go-kart thing for a while.
Rosemary let us on it free on VJ Day.
Oh, did she?
Oh, yes.
What was the other?
The other
Oh,
freeze.
and then the freeze.
Racetrack.
The freeze was a gas
The-
station.
The freeze was a gas station at first. Yes,
Freeze.
oh, great picture, I don't remember what it was.
The freeze.
And I spent my summers in there, flipping hamburgers and making soft ice cream cones. And then there, in 1951, in the summer of '51, on what was the farm area, the cattle grazing area, my dad and grandparents put in a harness racetrack. And that lasted for, I believe, one summer.
Did it?
I
didn't
have
have
pictures of that, it has grandstands.
Yes, it
and-
was great excitement.
was
There
cars
was
out
a newspaper article that I've seen that said it caused all kinds of excitement and everybody went, but nobody bought ticket or nobody bet, so it was not very profitable. And
But the show, only 20 people came over on the ferry at a time.
that's right. My dad said that it wasn't very good planning because the Dees Island Tunnel hadn't been thought of even, I'm sure. And he said there was a whole line of people on the other side, the north side of the river, waiting to come across. And so they just didn't gather the crowds. However, Patterson's racetrack in Ladner lasted long after that, and so I'm not sure. And then the racetrack was then in 1959 turned into an RV park, Seabird RV Park. And Kim and Gary, my sister and brother-in-law, bought that from my mom after my dad passed away. And now that's privately owned and not an RV park anymore. And then this is one of the cottages that we now have. The only cottage we have, but it's one of the cottages that originates from the 1915 era. This is what it looked like when we inherited it. This is that's from the back of it. This house up the hill, which is on the midden behind us on First Street, that's still there. And so that's the back of our house. And that's what it looked like when Curtis and Dorgan families built it. And the story goes that the women didn't enjoy, they camped next to each other for several years, but when they were under one roof, it didn't go so well. So they ended up, they sold it, and I don't know if they sold it directly back to my grandparents or if there were other people involved in between. But after my grandparents had it back, then they used it as a rental. And going back to it again, you see this is an open porch here, no doubt used as a sleeping porch, which was very common for the cottages in those days. And in the 50s, it was enclosed, the porch on the south side, and in the 80s, it became a bunk room, and there are 3 sets of bunks back there, so all the kids love it. Our daughter, Kristen, who's standing right there, was one of those, and Kim's kids, and
When
now...
you close the porch, they also put in an extra bathroom and a laundry room. To begin with, it's just the kitchen, living room, 1 bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. So then in closing that, added a lot of square footage.
And that's the bunk room. And this wall is the shake that was an exterior wall. And until this summer, it was still the dark brown of the original building. And we painted it a Cape Cod gray. At one point, I'm thinking in the 70s, my aunt in the living room put shakes over all the walls that had been white tongue and groove. And my brother-in-law took this wall out and opened it up to the kitchen. This is a picture of the original fireplace that still had an iron rod embedded in the bricks in the fireplace that had a hook on it for the women to cook over. It's a raised hearth, so they weren't bending way down to do their cooking in 1915. And they could hang their pots on this rod. But then when Kim and Gary put in a fireplace wood-burning insert, the rod had to come out because it took up too much room. This is what the living room looks like now with a propane fireplace in it, and it shows the open area into the kitchen. and that's the living room. Oops. As it was a couple of years ago. And one of the bedrooms. And then we put a porch on, well, Rosemary put a porch on the back, and we've replaced it since then. And
2006.
this is what, oh yeah, that's the flood. And so my last lines were to be, it has survived earthquakes and floods, and being a raised, it was built in the floodplain before the road was raised and before the bulkhead was put in. So it was fine in this flood, and the houses behind us were built later on the ground, and they suffered quite a bit of damage. And this is just how, this is a family that still rents. They started renting from my aunt in the late 70s, and they're on a second generation now. They just had 2 weeks there, and this is them on the back porch with relatives and enjoying. There's another family that rented from my grandparents from 1950 until about sometime in the 90s, so about 40 years. And then this is our family enjoying time at the beach. And so.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Carol.
Yes, yes.
When did they stop calling it Michael Palisades? I'm always calling it that, and they say, where's that?
Well, we haven't quit calling it that. Because there isn't a sign designating it as such, I still have record, a plot plan that's labeled Michael Palisades. Michael Palisades is where Donegal and Killarney Lane or road is. Where you used to live up, that was Whalen, the Whalen Estates. And on the other side of Boundary Bay Road was the first Palisade, and that was Elizabeth Palisades, named after my grandmother. Her name is very interesting to me. She, on the census, 1880 census, she was listed as Isabel. And I grew up knowing her as Lila, but then there's Elizabeth Palisades named after her. So I'm thinking she didn't like the name Isabel. I'm not sure where Elizabeth came from, but we all knew her as Lila. And yeah.
You know about the church, the ladies group of the church, they had the bazaars year after year, is Lila Whalen.
Yes, that's how she was known.
Church.
Yeah. From the time
They
that
honored her with her name.
She started the Orthopedic
How
Children's
nice.
Guild, right?
Yes, the Lila Whalen Orthopedic Guild.
That's it.
She was quite a go-getter. My dad used to say she was the idea person. Her ideas were probably what produced the skating rink. They had street dances that went out onto the wharf that they built. She had garden parties, which Terry Laporte continued, which was so nice. It was so much fun to go to the garden party that Terry had at the farmhouse when Kristen was younger, so she could experience it too. Yeah, Grandma was quite a leader.
Where was the water source?
The water source was from springs
Yes.
on the hillside behind the farmhouse, what is now Whalen Estates
so
and Michael
The
Palisades.
back of where our property was up on Whalen Drive, you walk down and through, you're probably going a bit behind a couple of the other properties, but the dam is still there, And some of
reservoir.
the reservoir dam and some bits and things are still up there.
But was that where the spring was, or
The
just the reservoir?
The spring, the reservoir captured the water from the springs.
And the spring was there?
Yes.
Okay.
And
There's a spring.
that's what feeds, you know, at the end of Maple, as the beach, there's that wooden, the old pilings that are at the end of Maple on the beach, or the end of Elm on the beach. Do you know, you come down.
Yeah.
Grandpa or my great-grandfather put those pilings there to protect the outsource, but since then it's plugged up and the spring has, the runoff from the spring is still making its way down, and we were awakened by Canadian geese that have found that fresh water source and came swooping down. You were no doubt too. Yeah, they're a month early. But that natural water that comes down Elm and onto the beach, my dad said, he played in it and built the dams just like the kids still do, you know. But that's the water that was feeding the reservoir on the south side of the farmhouse, and there's one that was up the hill from the racetrack or the farm land, pasture land.
Okay.
And I've never seen that cement structure, but Gary took Kristen up there when she was a little kid. I've seen the cement.
Now, but we hiked up we walked up to the woods from the RV park.
Right.
And yeah, it wasn't difficult to walk through. That was probably 15 years ago now, at least.
Another thing that happened briefly on that part of the property where the home stretch of the racetrack is in 1960 or 61, my dad had a turf airstrip put in, but I don't
And
think
then
it
he also has
was.
race cars.
Oh, well, yes, that first summer after the harness races, then there were stock car races too, weren't there?
That's
Where was that area? Where was that?
Do you know where Whalen's RV park was? On Roosevelt?
Okay.
The stables are still there. They're used for storage. So that was in 51, that was a harness racetrack, and then stock car races, and I think it was just that one
It's
summer.
about 4 blocks back from about 4 blocks back from
Yeah.
the water.
Right.
Yeah.
On Roosevelt.
Yes,
Okay.
Roosevelt and
Thank you.
Derby is the
8
address.
mile? 8 mile, you can do an 8 mile track.
Any other questions?
Back in the 90s, when we took up sailing, we spent some of our time riding our bikes around the park.
Uh-huh.
And what we noticed was a border line, which I assume it had served a good need, so everyone knew that they were properly on the right side of the border. But yet many of the people that we talked to that spent time down in there, and some have actually moved up onto the Harbor Seal area and what have you, a lot of Canadians. Is it predominantly developed to start with by Canadian families that maybe didn't have an opportunity up on the Icelandic communities that build their own dairy and milk their own cows?
Well, the homes, the cottages you see now are mostly owned by Canadian vacationers. Not very many people live down on the bay year-round. And so I think we were the only homesteaders in the Maple Beach area.
All the way from the border to the private road.
Right. But my question is, as we rode our bikes down that trail, it was very easy to step through a little
Oh,
bit of a
yes,
ditch and
most
you were in Canada.
definitely.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Now, how did you know when you had maybe a restaurant or an ice cream bar or something that someone that was coming to buy some treats had actually clearly checked in to
Oh,
yeah.
the state
Well,
to start
in
with?
fact,
Sure.
interesting, Until,
Let's show your document.
there is still the Canadian Customs Building down on Roosevelt in the Maple Beach area. And it's such an interesting pixelated thing about Point Roberts is there was a Canadian well-established customs office there, but no American customs office. So you could come and go into Maple Beach without going through American customs. There was the customs, both American and Canadian, up here on Tyee, but only Canadian down there, and they were open until 5 in the wintertime and maybe 10 o'clock at night in the summertime. And no U.S. customs checking you into Maple Beach.
Actually, there was a trailer put in.
In the 60s, yes, my high school history teacher was one of the customs officers that manned that in the 60s. But until then, we didn't even have a trailer. And we used to, in the wintertime, if the customs was closed, you could still go back and forth. We'd ride our bikes across and get penny candy down at Anderson's little shop, just a quarter of a mile into Canada.
Do you remember the fish and chip shop and the little confectionery on the Canadian side had a door that opened?
Oh, was
in
it
the United
Chudley's?
States, and people could walk in, buy Canadian cigarettes, come out, carry it on.
It was,
Yeah.
there was Metcalf's,
Yeah.
yes, that's right too, yes, and the dances. The family that I had pictures of on our back steps, the parents who are no longer living met at one of Metcalf's Saturday night dances and were engaged over Labor Day weekend. So they liked to always have their rental time at the end of the summer, you know, just as a memory. But I think there are a lot of couples that met at Metcalf dances. And you're right, you could just walk in, you were in Canada, buy your fish and chips and come back out
And
again.
you didn't play a slot machine, they had horse racing slot machine.
Oh, yeah. Things were great.
And the streets, as you ride along, there's many
They're all
Canadian provinces names and
Yes,
a
yes.
few American state names, I think, are on some of the side roads, but it's,
just,
if you think
yes.
about Canada, and you ride
That's
around there,
right.
we had to initially ask, is this the part of Point Roberts that's actually Canada? Where our boat, where the marina is actually America, because a lot of American flags on the map.
We have relatives who have come up from California to visit, and we're so surprised to see all the Canadian license plates here, to see the cash registers have 2 drawers, one for Canadian bills and one for American. And it's very unique. Yeah, the majority are Canadian. Pardon? Oh, okay. So, and I'm one, my parents were living at Maple Beach when I was born, and the closest hospital was in Vancouver, so I was born at St. Paul's Hospital and have dual citizenship, and now Kristen does too. She formalized it before she was 25, so yeah, the best of both worlds.
And it created a career for sheriffs, didn't it, eventually?
Yeah.
It was the beginning of deputy sheriffs, and I think a kid found crossing was usually given a general penalty to start with, until they start keeping records.
Oh, right. Jeff
Then they
Martin.
built a fence, didn't they?
Jeff Martin, the resident electrician, was also our sheriff, and my dad taught me how to drive here when I was 13. And in the wintertime, I drove down to the store and got some canned goods off the shelves, because it was a general store as well. And Jeff was making his security rounds and had seen the back door ajar. I had come in the front, so he asked to call my dad. And he knew that if I was the only one in the store and the car is there and I am a very short 13-year-old with a pillow, I had driven myself. And so he called my dad and they talked about what his concern was about the back door ajar, and then he said to me, I wouldn't pinch my girlfriend, meaning that he wasn't going to get after me for having driven at the age of 13. But yeah, very lax.
Well, thanks very much, Michelle.
Thank you.
You both gave us a wonderful talk, and there's pictures to be looked at, and
Yeah, I
slideshow to watch,
accidentally. I should.
artifacts to touch. And next week, we're going to do the Magnuson homestead again, my sister and I.
Oh,
There's a lot of people that haven't seen that.
I wish I were going to be here for it.
It's all recorded.
Yes.
Michelle?
Oh, good.
The Hausers lived in your house before.
Sorry?
The Hausers lived in your house before you did.
Did they?
And then the Pollards have been next door since that house was built.
In what is now the Cannons?
No, next to that, the Pollards.
What is called,
The big red one.
yes,
Yeah.
okay, the Irish, I forget, Kildare. Yeah, Kildare, yes. They were the Pollards?
Pollards.
Okay.
I don't know what they're, I don't
And
know.
Hausers were in ours?
It was always called the Hauser House.
Oh, now that's, do you recognize the name Rondo Lodge? That's the name that my aunt referred to it as, and we don't know where that came from.
Is it detrimental, sort of a lodge or something?
I don't know. Yeah. So, and you said it was always the Hauser house, so that'd be interesting to see when, have you any
Before they
idea?
had numbers on the houses.
No. Do you know when they sold it to my grandparents?
Oh, I have no idea.
No.
Okay. Do you know up to what time it was still the Hauser house?
Certainly when
I'm
the boys were young.
Through the 30s into the early 40s. maybe.
Oh, okay. Houser?
Oh, U-S-E-R, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wouldn't the county
County should have some.
records have that?
Yes. Title searches are really expensive, so we have tried to do what we can ourselves.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that might be helpful to us, yes. Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.